I want to start this conversation with a statement that might sound completely counterintuitive to 99% of those who consider themselves prepared. You have stacked your physical gold. You have accumulated your physical silver. You have done the hard work, the unpopular work, of holding real assets while the world ran headlong into the casino of fiat currency and debt saturation. You believe you know the playbook. You buy metal, you wait for the crash, and you survive. Simple. But I am here to tell you that the single greatest and most profound error you can make when the global monetary system finally, irreversibly, capitulates the moment you have prepared for your entire adult life is selling your precious metals too early, or worse, selling them for the wrong thing entirely. This is not a theoretical exercise based on historical anecdotes from Weimar or Zimbabwe. We are talking about the reality of a global sovereign debt crisis culminating in the monetization endgame. When the illusion of stability finally shatters, when the confidence in the central banks evaporates faster than water in a desert wind, and when the US dollar, the linchpin of the global reserve system, finally surrenders its deeply entrenched status, that moment of maximum chaos will present itself. And in that environment, you will be confronted with a psychological and operational choice that will define whether your decade of preparation merely allowed you to survive, or whether it allowed you to achieve truly generational wealth. The system is already broken. It is merely awaiting the final, undeniable catalyst for recognition. We are currently witnessing an unprecedented expansion of debt that can never, under any circumstances, be repaid through conventional taxation or productive output. It can only be resolved through absolute rampant debasement, that is, inflation, followed by hyperinflation. The governments and central banks are trapped in a zero-sum game of perpetual money creation. They print, or the system collapses immediately into a depression far deeper than the 1930s. They choose printing every single time. This inevitable path leads us to one certainty: the guaranteed devaluation and eventual annihilation of every paper asset, every long-duration bond, every unbacked electronic deposit, and every promise issued by an insolvent sovereign entity. When this acute phase of the collapse hits, and I am talking about the true sharp end of the event, not just the preceding inflation, the psychological pressures will be immense. The banking infrastructure will likely freeze up entirely. ATMs will stop functioning, or they will dispense paper that is declining in purchasing power by the hour. Supply chains will fracture, and localized shortages of essentials, including food and energy, will rapidly emerge. This is when the fear takes hold, even among the prepared. You hold thousands of ounces of physical silver, but your neighbor is hungry, and the local market is only accepting cash, even if that cash is worthless tomorrow. The instinctive temptation, born of desperation for immediate shallow liquidity, is to sell a small piece of your permanent wealth, a few ounces of silver, a fraction of an ounce of gold, to acquire temporary, fleeting necessities denominated in a collapsing currency. This is the deadly trap. This is the slippery slope that turns years of diligent stacking into a mere cushion for temporary relief, rather than a launchpad for ultimate prosperity. You trade permanence for panic. You exchange true, tangible money, which has zero counterparty risk, for ephemeral numbers that represent maximum systemic risk. The question, therefore, is not if you should sell your precious metals, because circumstances may indeed force transactions, but rather, what specific form of compensation or asset transfer justifies parting with a single, irreplaceable ounce of real money? We must establish a strict, almost religious protocol for monetary triage during the collapse. The primary function of holding gold and silver is not merely purchasing groceries when the fiat structure dies. That is a rudimentary survivalist perspective. The sophisticated wealth-building purpose of precious metals during a monetary collapse is to serve as the ultimate, pristine medium of exchange that allows you to capture deeply mispriced productive assets that become available only in the panic phase. Think about the structural distortion that occurs during an acute collapse. In Phase 1, fiat assets melt down and precious metals rise, reflecting the true cost of money. In Phase 2, the hyperinflationary panic, people try to flee currency altogether, but they still need to transact, because the collapse causes catastrophic illiquidity. Assets that are usually stable, like land, productive real estate, Income-generating businesses and high-quality physical infrastructure will suddenly become available at prices that reflect panic, not intrinsic value. The holders of these assets, often facing sudden margin calls, debt obligations in the old currency structure, or simply needing immediate, tangible security, will dump these productive assets indiscriminately. This creates the once-in-a-lifetime arbitrage opportunity. You should never sell your gold for a collapsing dollar. That is trading gold for garbage. The mandate is to trade your gold only for true, tangible assets that have become temporarily mispriced due to systemic collapse. You must trade gold for productive, durable assets that represent future, sustained wealth. This requires patience, discipline, and a deep understanding of historical commodity and asset ratios. I want to drill this crucial point home with absolute clarity. We are not holding metal just to protect our purchasing power. We are holding it to capture the single most massive, rapid wealth transfer event in modern human history. Every crisis generates new fortunes, and this one, born of the largest debt bubble the world has ever known, promises the largest shift of wealth from the fiscally irresponsible class to the disciplined, hard asset holding class. The moment of maximum fear, when the media is screaming about chaos and the price of the metal seems temporarily irrelevant because no one is accepting paper, is precisely the moment of maximum strategic profit if you know precisely what asset class to target and what specific ratios must be met. Let us briefly consider the gold-to-silver ratio. For decades, paper manipulation and industrial demands have distorted the historical relationship between the two metals. Silver, being the monetary metal of the common person and the primary industrial commodity, is severely undervalued relative to gold. During the final acute phase of a monetary reset or collapse, silver historically outperforms gold dramatically, compressing the ratio. You have held silver specifically to benefit from this mean reversion. To sell that silver prematurely for cheap paper dollars is to forego not only the protection of the metal, but also the exponential leverage built into the ratio trade itself. Your goal is to maximize the silver stack first, then trade silver for gold at the ratio low, and finally, trade gold for real assets. To skip that intermediate step by selling silver for fast cash is a profound failure of strategy. The true definition of liquidity in a collapse environment shifts entirely. Liquidity is not the speed at which you can convert an asset into fiat currency. Liquidity is the inherent, universally recognized acceptance of a physical medium of exchange for necessary goods or assets. Gold and silver are liquidity, whereas paper currency, once confidence is gone, instantly becomes illiquid, useless scrap. Therefore, the truth about selling gold during a monetary collapse is shockingly simple, yet operationally complex. You sell fiat garbage for gold and silver, and you sell gold and silver only for real, tangible, productive assets that are temporarily mispriced by a magnitude of historical proportions due to systemic panic. If you witness a high-quality multifamily rental unit, a functional industrial building, or 100 acres of fertile farmland trading for the equivalent weight of a few hundred ounces of silver, or perhaps 3 to 5 ounces of gold, that, and only that, is the moment you execute the trade. Anything less is a compromise of your ultimate financial destiny. Survival is achieved simply by holding physical metal and doing nothing. Prosperity, however, is achieved only by judiciously trading that metal at the absolute peak of monetary panic, when the prices of real, productive wealth have collapsed relative to sound money. That is the payoff. In the next segment, we will transition entirely into the operational mechanics required to capitalize on this event. We must discuss the specific triggers, the exact gold-to-silver ratio divergence we must wait for to maximize our metal holdings, the necessary methods for executing large asset transfers outside of the freezing or collapsed banking structure, and the critical checklist of fire sale assets that will represent the foundation of the next global financial structure. Prepare your checklist. The time for passive holding is nearing its end, and the era of active, strategic trading is about to begin. We must start by confronting the single most dangerous temptation that will grip even the most dedicated physical metal holder when the true monetary paroxysm begins. I have seen it time and time again in many cycles, and the great one will be no different, only magnified to a societal fever pitch. That temptation is the siren song of the immediate panicked liquidation. You will see the headline price of gold drop, and it will drop, perhaps steeply, in the very opening phase of the crisis, measured against the failing fiat unit. But let me be perfectly clear, this drop is a phantom, a trick of the light reflecting the desperate need for liquidity in a system that is seizing up. This initial sell-off is not an indictment of gold's inherent value. It is a desperate flight of capital seeking dollar-denominated collateral to cover collapsing derivatives and margin calls. Everything that can be sold to raise rapidly vanishing cash will be sold, including the paper claims on gold and the easier-to-access physical holdings. If you are watching the screen and seeing the spot price retreat from its nominal highs, and you allow that momentary panic to coerce you into relinquishing your position, you are making the single greatest mistake of your financial life. You are trading the only asset guaranteed to retain its purchasing power for the very medium that is in the process of definitive self-destruction. The true context is this: we are moving beyond inflation and entering the phase of hyperstagflation, transitioning eventually into systemic collapse and monetary reset. In this environment, the nominal price of gold becomes utterly irrelevant. The only measure that matters is purchasing power parity. What tangible goods and services can your ounce of silver or gold acquire? When the banks are freezing credit, when supply chains are breaking, and when governments are printing trillions of units of currency that no longer hold the faith of the populace, the game changes entirely. The paper unit becomes hot potato, and the metal becomes the ultimate store of energy and trust. The problem, the core conflict, is managing the period of highest volatility, the great unmooring. For months, perhaps even years, you will struggle with the open loop of uncertainty. How do I transact? Will people even accept gold? The answer is that they will not accept it immediately in the grocery store aisle, not at first. The function of precious metals during this transition is not small daily retail transaction. That task will fall to robust local bartering, or perhaps fractional silver coins for essential goods, if not a return to localized scripts. The primary function of the gold you hold is as the reserve account of last resort and the ultimate vehicle for wealth transfer across the systemic divide. This brings us to the crucial developmental stages of the collapse and the defining answer to the question, when do you sell? We identify three distinct phases after the initial liquidity squeeze has passed. Once the forced liquidation is complete and the central bank realizes it must print even more aggressively to stave off total systemic default, fiat currencies enter the hyperinflationary death spiral. This is when the nominal price of gold, measured in the failing currency, explodes exponentially. Gold moves from 4 figures to 5 figures and then possibly 6 in rapid succession. Crucially, even though the number is astronomical, your gold is merely keeping pace with the destruction of the currency. You are not richer, you are simply maintaining purchasing parity. Selling here for fiat is tempting because the numbers are staggering, but you are still just exchanging one ephemeral promise for another, albeit with an ever faster expiry date. The money you receive will be devalued before you can spend it effectively. Do not sell for fiat in phase 1. This is the moment of maximum chaos and maximum opportunity, the definitive climax of the crisis. This phase is characterized by two things. First, the institutional refusal to accept the old fiat currency for real assets. The banks shut down, cash becomes meaningless for large transactions. And second, the desperate fire sale of productive assets by previous owners who are either collapsing financially or who hold large debts that cannot be serviced. This creates the window where gold and silver transition from being merely a store of value to becoming the primary medium of exchange for high-value transactions. During this period, you do not sell your gold for dollars, pounds, or yen. You sell your gold directly for tangible, productive assets. This is the ultimate payoff. You are using the lifeboat, your gold holdings, to purchase the entire ship: real estate, productive farmland, critical infrastructure, equity in fundamentally sound resource companies, or physical inventory. The ratios, the gold-to-Dow ratio, the gold-to-housing ratio, will compress to historical extremes. This is the only time you should consider liquidating significant portions of your holdings, when you are acquiring something durable, generating cash flow, or necessary for basic life functions, at valuation multiples that will never be seen again in your lifetime. You are exchanging perfect, non-productive wealth, metal, for imperfect, productive wealth, assets. That is the true purpose of physical metal ownership during a collapse. It is the bridge to the subsequent recovery. Let us re-engage with the core philosophy here, the stewardship model. Your gold is not a trading vehicle, it is a defensive shield. It represents stored human labor and energy. To sell it too early for transient paper is to betray the immense effort required to acquire it in the first place. You must be prepared to ignore the noise, ignore the day-to-day volatility, and focus solely on the ratio trade. If 1 ounce of gold can buy an entire city block of real estate that was previously valued at $10 million, that is when you execute the trade. The fiat price is merely the chaotic accounting mechanism used to record the transfer. Eventually, the panic subsides, often violently and politically. Governments, having exhausted every Keynesian trick and having successfully wiped out the national debt via hyperinflation, will attempt to implement a new monetary system. Whether this is a central bank digital currency, CBDC, or a return to a pseudo-gold standard, or a basket of commodities, it represents a formal attempt to re-establish trust and stability. If this new system is implemented, and I believe some form of hard asset backing, however superficial, will be required to garner initial global trust, gold and silver will have a designated, likely high value within the new framework. Selling into this newly formalized system, if necessary for long-term liquidity planning or retirement, is acceptable. But only after you have already capitalized on the asset acquisition window of Phase 2. By the time Phase 3 arrives, your primary wealth should be cemented in real productive holdings, not just metal. Therefore, the definitive conclusion is simple and absolute. You do not sell physical gold or silver during a monetary collapse to accumulate fiat currency. You hold it through the darkest fear, you use it as the ultimate negotiating lever during the systemic fire sale, and you deploy it only to transition into permanent, productive, income-generating assets when those assets are trading at distressingly cheap ratios relative to hard money. Your exit strategy is not financial, it is physical. It is an exchange of monetary insurance for generational wealth. This requires courage, patience, and a deep understanding of monetary history that transcends daily media panic. The few who hold firm will be the ones who exit the crisis with their wealth intact, prepared to rebuild the economy on sounder principles. The time for preparation is over. The time for wavering is past. The only action remaining is rigorous security and unyielding conviction. Ensure your physical holdings are secure, diversified, and understood by those who must inherit them. Focus on the ounces, not the dollars. Stay metal-focused, stay vigilant, and never, ever trade your permanence for their panic. This is the truth about selling gold and silver during a monetary collapse. The answer is almost always no, until the exchange is made directly for assets that feed, house, or produce.